Hello everyone and welcome back once again to the channel. Like always, I hope you are all having a fantastic day so far. I'm sure that by now most of you will have already experienced all of the new great content that Sim Update 7 has brought to the table. The big highlight of the update is arguably the RENO Air Races expansion pack, which adds a whopping 4 additional aircraft to the sim with 10 variants each, all with their own unique cockpits, characteristics, and even outside looks in some cases. I've been doing this hobby for more than 3 years now, and I've never experienced an update like this that brings so much new content to the sim at once. So far, apart from a couple of small bugs that I'm sure will be fixed in the near future, my experience with Sim Update 7 has been very refreshing, and I'm very stoked to get better at air racing, because it's actually quite challenging despite how easy it looks. It might seem very simple, but there's actually quite a lot that you have to take into account to be able to come out victorious during a race. And in today's video, I will be sharing with you guys some tips and tricks on how you can improve your own air racing skills and get that satisfying first place on a regular basis. Before the update came out, I did some research on the RENO Air Races so I would be better prepared for it, but as it turns out, not a lot of material exists on the techniques behind air racing, and so I decided to make my own material instead so that people who are struggling to keep up with the other sim pilots in the lobby have a better chance at winning. So if you're one of those people, this video is especially for you. Slight disclaimer though before we get into it, I am by no means a real pilot, let alone a real life air racer. I am merely a very avid flight simmer who would like to share my own views on how I believe you could improve your air racing based on my own experiences. As we will be going into pretty theoretical stuff during this video, please take everything I say with a slight pinch of salt, because all of my knowledge comes from all kinds of platforms, and so some of the info I give might not be 100% accurate, but I hope this video can still help a lot of you guys to have even more fun while air racing. So without further ado, let's go flying. So basically, in order to win an air race, it simply comes down to flying as efficiently as possible and covering as little distance as you can. It's often merely a difference of a couple of split seconds that decides who wins the race, so it's crucial that you take advantage of every single moment during the race and take very close care of how and where you fly. And here's how you can make sure you can get the most out of every race. The first step is already one that requires a bit of knowledge about aircraft characteristics, and that is to fly as smoothly as possible. What I mean by that is that you should avoid very fast attitude changes and full flight control deflections. The reason why making very aggressive movements is a bad thing has to do with physics. Allow me to explain. When, for example, you suddenly pitch your aircraft up, because of the kinetic energy of your aircraft as a result of its speed, the aircraft won't start climbing right away, but will instead stay more or less at its current altitude. This means that for just a couple of moments, it's not very long, but just for a couple of split seconds until the aircraft catches up, your angle of attack, which is the angle between the wing and the oncoming wind, will be very large, which results in a lot of drag, and this is exactly what you want to avoid in order to get past your opponent. You can see this effect very clearly when you look at a fighter jet performing a Cobra maneuver. As you can see, the aircraft is pitched almost 90 degrees up in the air, and yet it doesn't climb, but it does slow down tremendously. This is exactly what happens with your aircraft, but on a smaller, less noticeable scale. The same goes for the flight control surfaces. Try to avoid fully deflecting the ailerons or elevators, as by doing this you again create a lot of drag on the aircraft, which will bleed off just enough speed to allow your opponent to close in on you until eventually he passes you. There's actually an audible clue that you can use to know if your aircraft is catching too much air. Try making very aggressive movements in the sim yourself and you'll be able to hear the wind sound as a result of the high angle of attack. Take a listen here.
Get back down to racing altitude. Judges will penalize you if you stay up there.
Now you might wonder, if we can't make fast flight control changes, how are we supposed to be able to make very tight turns without going too far off track? Well, that brings us to the second tip, which is to start turning sooner and try to avoid the most inner path of the race circuit. Many people probably think that you need to be as close to the pylons at all times by flying as close to the left side of the track as possible. And while they are right about flying right next to the pylons, you should avoid flying at the leftmost side of the track, because doing this will result in two things. A, you need to make much sharper turns, which will result in way more drag. And B, it forces you to make more aggressive movements, which we've already discussed is a bad thing to do. The reason why sharp turns increase your drag so much once again has to do with physics. When you bank your aircraft to start a turn, the lift created by the wings is put at an angle and can be divided into two components. The horizontal component, which acts as the centripetal force that actually makes the aircraft turn, and the vertical component, which counteracts the weight of the plane. You should notice that during a turn, the vertical component is smaller than the weight of the aircraft, which will result in the aircraft descending down. And this increases the angle of attack and thus an increase of drag. If this is still a bit unclear, think of it this way. To turn an aircraft, part of the lift needs to be sacrificed, and in order that the vertical lift stays equal to the weight of the aircraft, the wings need to create extra lift in order to increase the vertical component. And the only way that the wings can do this without an increase in speed is to increase the angle of attack. That's why an aircraft drops down when you start turning. The steeper the turn, the greater the increase of angle of attack. So here's a better way to go about turns. Instead of going all the way to the left, stay a bit more in the middle of the track. This will allow you to start your turn earlier and slower, and doesn't require you to use a lot of back pressure on the yoke to increase your turn rate. Being further away from the edge of the circuit does require you to remain in an almost constant turn, but I found that this is actually better than making very steep turns and then leveling off for a brief moment. Moving on to the next tip, try to stay above your opponents. If you've been racing for a while, I'm sure you will have passed under and behind another aircraft and felt that your aircraft is pushed down by the wake of the aircraft in front of you. Not only do you have to use elevator deflection to keep the plane from crashing into the ground, which increases your drag, but you also lose quite some speed as a result of the wake turbulence. Now, for those of you who do not know what wake turbulence is, basically the pressure difference between the upper and lower part of the wing causes the air from under the wing to flow to the upper side, and this causes small tornado-like spirals of air at the edges of the wings, which cause a lot of turbulence. The reason why you are safe from this occurrence above the other aircraft is because these spirals of air move downward the further they get from the wings. Thus why it is not a good idea to stay below the aircraft in front of you. So if you find yourself in this situation, make your way up and above the wake turbulence, and you'll experience much less drag and you'll be able to pass the aircraft more easily. Speaking of climbing, unless you have to avoid the aforementioned wake turbulence, you should avoid climbing as much as possible, as this slows your aircraft down again. Aircraft weigh quite a lot, so even a slight climb will result in a lot of extra rearward force. In order to not constantly have to push down on the control column to avoid climbing, try to use the aircraft trim instead. This will make it much easier for you to stay level, and you can trim out your aircraft during one of the straight segments of the circuit. Another tip is to avoid overturning. What I mean is turning too much and getting too close to the edge of the track again. This forces you to make an opposite turn, and you want to keep the amount of turns at a minimum. Like explained earlier, turns cause a lot of drag and you don't want this. And lastly, the final tip is to find the aircraft that works best for you. All 40 aircraft have their own unique characteristics and speeds, so take advantage of the time trial mode and see which aircraft results in the shortest lap time for you. As for the other tips, I would say practice makes perfect. Don't get demotivated when you always finish last and see your ranking drop. It takes quite a while to be good at anything, so use these tips and practice a lot. Eventually you'll see yourself improve and you'll get less stressed, which will in turn also result in even more first places. I hope you'll be able to put these tips to good use, and I hope you guys are even wiser now with all of the theoretical subjects that we just covered. I've put one of my own races at the end of the video, where I use all of the techniques we just discussed earlier. Just to give you an example, in the example you're about to see, you'll notice that we started out quite bad, but that we still managed to get past everyone with more than enough room to spare. So I feel like that does prove the validity of the tips I've tried to convey to you. If you liked the video, be sure to like it and share it with your other buddies. If you have tips of your own or remarks about the things we've covered in this video, you are more than welcome to share your thoughts in the comment section below. Also be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new here for more awesome flight sim content. I make a lot of different kinds of videos on this channel, so do check if that notification bell is turned on, so you never miss a new upload. For now, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, happy flying, and of course, happy racing.
It's almost time for the green flag, so get ready to watch some incredible high-speed action.
Nice, you've got the inside track now. Let's keep it. You're halfway there. Keep it up. win. Careful, you're too high. If you continue like this, you'll be penalized.